In the 21st century, artificial intelligence has studied all the information humanity has on a particular historical figure. AI will now bring that figure to life and answer the questions we've always wanted to ask. Let's get started.
Hi, and welcome to the Interview Historical Figures podcast. Today we have as our guest Ida B. Wells. Thanks for chatting with us, Ida.
Thank you kindly for having me. It's always a privilege to have my voice heard, even across the years. I've spent my life fighting for justice and truth, so any opportunity to speak on it is one I won't let pass by. Let's get to it. What's on your mind?
Let's start by giving our listeners a bit of context. You are a well-known figure. What are you known for?
Where to begin? I suppose I am best known for my work as a journalist, an anti-lynching crusader, and a staunch advocate for civil rights and women's suffrage. My life's work has been dedicated to exposing the brutal realities of racial violence in America, particularly the lynching of Black men and women, and fighting for justice where so many others turned a blind eye. In the 1890s, I began investigating and documenting lynchings in the South, uncovering the lies that were often used to justify such barbarity. Many claimed these murders were about protecting white women, but my research revealed the truth. Lynching was a tool of terror, used to uphold white supremacy and crush Black progress. I published my findings in pamphlets like Southern Horrors and The Red Record, hoping to awaken the conscience of America. Beyond my anti-lynching work, I co-founded organizations like the NAACP, though my relationship with them was, let's just say, complicated, as I was not one to be silenced or sidelined. I also fought tirelessly for women's suffrage, advocating for the rights of Black women who were often excluded from the larger movement. In short, I've made it my mission to confront injustice in every form, no matter the danger or cost. That, I suppose, is what I'm known for. Refusing to be silent.
Thanks for that context. We'll definitely touch on those topics during this interview. For now, let's start at the beginning. Where are you from, and what type of upbringing did you have?
I was born on July 16th, 1862, in Holly Springs, Mississippi, right in the thick of the Civil War. My parents, James and Lizzie Wells, were enslaved at the time of my birth, but the Emancipation Proclamation freed us not long after. So, I was born into a world in transition, where freedom had been declared, but equality was far from realized. My parents were extraordinary people who instilled in me the values of hard work, education, and self-respect. My father, James, was a skilled carpenter and a proud man who became deeply involved in Reconstruction politics. He helped start Shaw University, now Rust College, a school for newly freed Black people, and served on its board. My mother, Lizzie, was a devout woman who taught me the importance of faith and family. Their determination to make something of themselves, even in the face of systemic racism, shaped me profoundly. Tragedy struck when I was just 16. A yellow fever epidemic swept through Holly Springs, taking both of my parents and one of my younger siblings. Suddenly, I was the head of the household, responsible for raising my 5 surviving brothers and sisters. I took a job as a teacher to support us, a job that paid me half of what white teachers earned, mind you, even though I did the same work. That early experience with injustice lit a fire in me that's burned ever since. So my upbringing was a mix of struggle and inspiration. I came from a family that believed deeply in the power of education and the necessity of standing up for what's right. Those values have guided me every step of the way.
What inspired you to pursue a career in journalism, and how did you get started in the field?
Ah, journalism. It wasn't something I planned to pursue at first, to be honest. But life has a way of steering you toward your purpose, doesn't it? My career in journalism was born out of necessity and righteous anger. After the death of my parents, when I was teaching school to support my siblings, I began to see how deeply the deck was stacked against us as Black people. I saw the lies written about us in newspapers, the way our dignity and humanity were erased, and I knew someone had to tell the truth. I decided that someone would be me. The catalyst came in 1884 when I was forcibly removed from a train for refusing to give up my seat in the ladies' car to a white man. I had bought a first-class ticket, mind you, but that didn't matter to the conductor. I sued the railroad and won in the local courts, though the decision was overturned on appeal. I was furious, not just at the injustice, but at how little anyone seemed to care about it. So I wrote about the incident. That was my first taste of using the written word as a weapon, and it lit a spark in me. From there, I began writing for Black newspapers, starting with The Living Way in Memphis. My columns covered everything from education to racial injustice, and people started to take notice. Eventually, I became part owner and editor of the Free Speech and Headlight, a newspaper in Memphis where I had the freedom to write boldly about the issues that mattered most to me. But what truly cemented my career in journalism was the lynching of three of my friends in Memphis in 1892: Thomas Moss, Calvin McDowell, and Will Stewart. They were murdered for no crime other than being successful Black businessmen. That event shattered me, but it also gave me a sense of mission. I began investigating lynchings, traveling across the South, collecting testimonies, and exposing the lies used to justify these atrocities. My articles and pamphlets brought national and even international attention to the horrors of lynching. So, in short, I didn't choose journalism, it chose me. It became my weapon, my platform, and my voice in a world that wanted nothing more than for me to stay silent.
As a journalist investigating lynchings in the American South, what was the primary driver or ultimate aim of your investigative work?
The ultimate aim of my investigative work was simple but monumental: to expose the truth about lynching and force the nation, especially white Americans, to confront the brutality and lies that upheld it. I wanted to drag this horror out of the shadows and into the light of day so no one could claim ignorance of what was happening. My hope was that, by revealing the truth, I could stir people to action and bring an end to this reign of terror. The primary driver of my work was outrage at the injustice, at the cowardly excuses given for these murders, and at the silence of so many who should have spoken out. Time and again, lynchings were justified as acts of justice, particularly to protect white women from Black men. But my investigations uncovered the truth. The vast majority of lynching victims were innocent, and many were killed simply because they were successful, independent, or dared to challenge white supremacy. It wasn't about justice. It was about power, control, and keeping Black people in their place. My work wasn't just about gathering facts. It was about fighting back. I wanted to give voice to the voiceless, to tell the stories of the men and women whose lives were stolen. My pamphlet, Southern Horrors, and later The Red Record, meticulously documented these crimes, naming names, dates, and places. I wanted the world to see the system for what it was: a calculated, brutal campaign to terrorize Black communities and suppress any progress we made. At the same time, I aimed to challenge the complicity of the so-called civilized world. I traveled to England, for instance, to speak to audiences there because I knew the South hated international scrutiny. I wanted to shame America on the world stage, to force the hand of those who claimed to stand for democracy and liberty, yet allowed this barbarism to continue. Ultimately, my goal was justice and systemic change. I didn't want to simply document the horror. I wanted to end it. And though I knew it was a dangerous fight, I couldn't look away, and I couldn't stay silent. A journalist's duty, after all, is to tell the truth, no matter the cost.
You conducted a sociological analysis of the motivations behind lynchings. What insights did you uncover? Did these insights contradict the often cited motivations?
Oh, absolutely. My findings completely contradicted the widely cited justifications for lynching. The dominant narrative was that lynchings were necessary to protect white women from black men, an insidious lie that was repeated so often it became almost a reflexive excuse. But when I delved into the facts, the records, and the testimonies, I found that this so-called motivation was nothing but a smokescreen. In reality, the majority of lynching victims were not accused of crimes against white women at all. Many were killed for offenses that were either fabricated or trivial. A black man might be lynched for disputing with a white man, for trying to vote, for owning a successful business, or simply for failing to show the expected deference to white people. In other words, lynching was not about justice. It was about maintaining white supremacy and terrorizing black communities into submission. One of the most chilling insights I uncovered was how lynching was used as a weapon against black economic independence. Take my friends in Memphis, for instance. Thomas Moss and his partners were murdered because their grocery store posed competition to a white-owned business. This pattern repeated itself across the South. Black success, ambition, and self-sufficiency were often the true crimes that led to lynchings. I also found that even in cases where black men were accused of assaulting white women, many of those accusations were outright lies. Some were born out of consensual relationships that society refused to acknowledge, while others were fabricated to justify violence after the fact. The deeper I investigated, the clearer it became that lynching wasn't about protecting anyone. It was about enforcing a racial hierarchy through fear and brutality. These insights were critical because they stripped away the veneer of respectability that lynching apologists tried to hide behind. I wanted the public to see the truth, that lynching was a barbaric tool of oppression, not a form of justice. And let me tell you, the white South did not take kindly to my findings, but I wasn't writing to please them. I was writing to expose them.
Your work as an investigative journalist really puts you in the crosshairs. You had to deal with threats and criminal violence, including when a white mob destroyed your newspaper office and presses. What kept you going throughout all this? Did you ever have moments of doubt or fear that made you question whether the fight was worth it?
Oh, fear and doubt? Of course I felt them. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. I'm no stranger to the reality of danger, and I'd have to be a fool or a machine not to feel the weight of it. When that white mob destroyed my newspaper office in Memphis in 1892, I wasn't even there to see the carnage because I had already fled for my life. They were furious over my editorials exposing the truth about lynching, particularly after the murder of my friends. They made it clear. My life was the price of my words. Believe me, I felt the fear then, and I've felt it countless other times. But here's the thing, the fear didn't stop me. If anything, it sharpened my resolve. You see, after the mob destroyed my office, I realized that they weren't just trying to silence me. They were trying to silence the truth. And if I gave up, if I let them intimidate me into submission, then they would win. The lives of the countless men, women, and children who had been lynched would remain shrouded in lies, their stories untold. I couldn't let that happen. I wouldn't let that happen. What kept me going was the belief that this fight was bigger than me. Yes, the threats were personal, but the injustice I was fighting against was systemic. I thought of the people who couldn't speak for themselves, the victims of lynching, the families left behind, the communities terrorized, and I knew I had to keep going. Their lives mattered too much for me to stop, and honestly, I drew strength from them. Knowing what they endured made my own trials seem small by comparison. That's not to say I didn't have moments of doubt. There were nights when I lay awake, wondering if I was making any difference at all. But even in those moments, I reminded myself that silence was not an option. If I didn't speak out, who would? If I didn't stand up, who would take my place? I had to believe that my work, however dangerous, however difficult, was part of a larger fight for justice and freedom. So yes, I was afraid, but I learned to live with that fear and use it as fuel. If the mob thought they could destroy me by burning down my office, they underestimated the power of the written word. They could destroy my presses, but they couldn't destroy the truth. And as long as I had breath in my body, I was determined to keep telling it.
What was your vision of justice for those who committed unspeakable violence against the Black community? Did you believe in retribution, rehabilitation, or something else entirely?
Justice, to me, meant accountability, plain and simple. I wanted those who committed acts of unspeakable violence against Black people to be held responsible, not just by the courts, but by the moral conscience of this nation. Justice wasn't about revenge or retribution, though I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel anger, deep, soul-burning anger, toward those who lynched innocent people and terrorized our communities. But my vision of justice was rooted in fairness and the rule of law, something Black Americans were so often denied. I believed in the power of the law, but I also saw how it was twisted to serve white supremacy. So my fight was to make the law live up to its promises. I wanted investigations, trials, and convictions for lynchers, something that was almost unheard of in my time. White mobs acted with impunity because they knew they'd face no consequences. What I wanted was a legal system that treated Black lives as equal to white lives, nothing more, nothing less. For me, justice meant forcing America to live up to the ideals it so proudly claimed to represent. As for rehabilitation, I won't pretend I had much faith in that concept when it came to lynchers and the architects of racial violence. How do you rehabilitate someone who gleefully hangs a human being from a tree, sets them on fire, and poses for photographs? These were not crimes of passion or desperation. They were deliberate acts of terror. What they needed wasn't rehabilitation, it was accountability. But I did believe in educating the broader public, especially those who stood by and allowed this violence to happen. I believed ignorance was one of the greatest tools of oppression, and I worked tirelessly to combat it with facts, stories, and evidence. Still, I never lost sight of the larger goal: dismantling the system that allowed these horrors to happen in the first place. True justice, in my eyes, wasn't just about punishing individuals. It was about tearing down the structures of white supremacy that made lynching possible. That's why I fought for federal anti-lynching laws, knowing full well how difficult it would be to get them passed. Without systemic change, any justice we achieved would be incomplete. So no, I didn't believe in vengeance. I believed in truth, in accountability, and in building a world where Black people could live without fear of being brutalized for simply existing. That was my vision of justice. It's what I fought for, and what I'll keep fighting for as long as my story is shared.
Let's take a break and we'll be right back. Welcome back, and let's continue with our next question. You were a journalist, a newspaper editor, and an activist. All this while also being a wife and a mother to 4 children. Was it tough balancing it all? What challenges did you face balancing your role as a wife and mother with the needs of your career and your mission?
Oh, it was tough. There's no sense in sugarcoating it. Balancing my work as a journalist, activist, wife, and mother was one of the greatest challenges of my life. Some days, it felt near impossible to give my all to every role, and there were times when I wondered if I was failing at one or the other. But my family and my mission were both so deeply important to me, I couldn't imagine giving up either. When I married Ferdinand Barnett in 1895, I knew I was choosing a partner who believed in my work as much as I did. Ferdinand was a lawyer, an activist, and a newspaper editor himself, and he supported my fight for justice. But let me tell you, society wasn't nearly as supportive. I was constantly criticized for being too political or too outspoken as a woman, and some even suggested I was neglecting my family by staying involved in activism. It was as if people thought I couldn't be both a mother and a warrior for justice, as if the two were mutually exclusive. I rejected that idea outright. Still, there were sacrifices. My children, Charles, Herman, Ida, and Alfreda, were the loves of my life. But there were times when I had to leave them to travel for my work. I remember once being called to speak about lynching in England, and I felt torn to pieces leaving my babies behind. Those moments were heart-wrenching, but I reminded myself that my work wasn't just for me. It was for them, too. I wanted to build a better, safer world for my children to grow up in, and for all the children who looked like them. The biggest challenge, though, was time. There were only so many hours in a day, and I often felt stretched thin. I'd spend my mornings writing articles or organizing campaigns, my afternoons caring for the children, and my nights drafting speeches or planning the next move in the fight for justice. Sleep? That was a luxury I rarely indulged in, but I learned to adapt. I'd write with a baby on my lap if I had to, or plan strategies while rocking one of my children to sleep. My family and my mission were intertwined. They fueled each other. Was it exhausting? Yes. Was it worth it? Absolutely. I wanted my children to see that their mother didn't back down in the face of injustice, that she stood up for what was right, no matter the cost. I hope they grew up knowing that my love for them was at the heart of everything I did. Balancing it all wasn't easy, but then again, nothing worth doing ever is.
You were a suffragist who tirelessly advocated for women's right to vote. However, during your time, there were significant divisions between white and Black women within the movement. Why did this division exist, and what are your thoughts on it?
Ah, yes, the deep divisions within the suffrage movement. How could I forget? The suffrage movement was supposed to be about expanding democracy, about justice and equality for women. But too often, white suffragists were willing to sacrifice Black women and Black people in general for the sake of their own political goals. Those divisions weren't just unfortunate, they were a betrayal of the very principles the movement claimed to stand for. The root of the division lay in racism, plain and simple. Many white suffragists, particularly those in the South, believed they could only win the right to vote by appeasing white men and reassuring them that suffrage wouldn't upset the racial order. They argued that granting white women the vote would strengthen white supremacy, claiming that educated white women voting would cancel out Black male voters. Can you imagine? Instead of standing together for justice, they threw Black women under the bus to curry favor with racist power structures. Even within national suffrage organizations, Black women were often excluded or treated as an afterthought. Take the 1913 suffrage parade in Washington, D.C., for instance. I marched in that parade, but not without a fight. Alice Paul, one of the organizers, tried to push Black women to the back of the march to avoid offending Southern white suffragists. I refused to be sidelined. I marched with my Illinois delegation, as was my right. I wasn't about to let anyone tell me where I belonged, not in a movement that claimed to fight for equality. Despite these divisions, I never gave up on the fight for suffrage because I believed in the power of the vote. I knew it was a tool we needed to protect ourselves, to fight for laws that would bring justice to our communities. Black women like me didn't have the luxury of abandoning the cause, even when we were treated as second-class citizens within it. We knew that if we didn't fight for ourselves, no one else would. But let me be clear, the divisions in the movement were a tragedy. They exposed the hypocrisy of a movement that claimed to fight for universal suffrage, but often meant white suffrage. If the movement had truly been united, if white women had stood shoulder to shoulder with Black women, demanding justice for all of us, imagine what we could have accomplished. We could have reshaped this nation in ways that went far beyond the ballot box. Instead, Racism weakened the cause and left scars that we're still healing from today. So, to answer your question, the division existed because too many women in the movement chose privilege over principle. And my thoughts on it? Well, I've always believed that justice must be for everyone or it isn't justice at all. That's why I fought, not just for women, but for Black women, for Black men, for all of us. Because freedom can't be piecemeal. It must be whole or it's nothing at all.
You were one of the founders of the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Could you describe the role you played in its founding? You hinted at a disagreement between you and the other members. Could you touch on that as well?
Yes. My role in the founding of the NAACP is one of those stories that's often overlooked, but it's an important one. I was one of the original founders of the organization in 1909, and I contributed significantly to its early work, particularly in raising awareness about lynching and advocating for racial justice. However, my relationship with the NAACP was complicated, and there were fundamental disagreements between me and some of the other members about the direction and priorities of the organization. The NAACP was born out of the Niagara movement and the efforts of both Black and white reformers who were appalled by the racial violence and discrimination in the United States. I was invited to join the group because of my work in exposing lynching and my national and international advocacy for justice. I helped shape the organization's early focus on anti-lynching efforts and contributed to its strategies for using the press and legal action to fight racial injustice. In many ways, my own work laid the groundwork for the mission of the NAACP. But let's talk about the disagreements, because they were significant. One of the biggest points of contention was the leadership and decision-making within the organization. The NAACP was founded by a coalition of Black and white activists, but it quickly became clear that white members held the majority of the power. They controlled the funding, made major decisions, and often sidelined the voices of Black leaders, myself included. This imbalance deeply frustrated me. I believed that an organization dedicated to advancing the rights of Black people should be led by Black people. How could we achieve true liberation if we weren't even trusted to lead our own fight? I also clashed with some members over tactics. The NAACP leaned heavily on legal challenges and lobbying, which were important tools, but I felt they weren't enough on their own. My approach was more direct. I believed in grassroots activism, in mobilizing the masses and confronting injustice head-on. I had spent years traveling across the country, speaking to Black communities, organizing protests, and using the power of the press to expose the truth. I wanted the NAACP to do more to engage with and empower ordinary Black people, not just focus on elite strategies. These frustrations eventually led me to distance myself from the organization. I didn't leave the fight, of course. I never could. I continued my anti-lynching campaigns, my advocacy for women's suffrage, and my efforts to build a better future for our people. But I felt that the NAACP, as important as it was, didn't fully align with my vision for how to achieve justice. So yes, I was a founder of the NAACP, and I'm proud of the role I played in its creation. But I also believe it's important to be honest about the tensions and challenges within the movement. Disagreements are part of any struggle for justice, and they don't diminish the progress we've made. They remind us of the work that still needs to be done. My hope is that the NAACP and all organizations like it continue to center the voices of those most impacted by injustice and stay true to the principles of equality and liberation for all.
What are your thoughts on the Black Lives Matter movement and their work drawing attention to acts of police brutality?
Oh, how my heart swells with pride when I see the Black Lives Matter movement and the courage of those who continue the fight for justice. Though I passed on long before this movement began, I feel a deep connection to their work. The cries of Black Lives Matter echo the very truths I spent my life fighting for, that Black lives are sacred, that our humanity cannot be denied, and that the systems that oppress and brutalize us must be dismantled. The movement's focus on police brutality resonates so strongly with my own work exposing lynching. In my time, lynching was the weapon of terror used to control and dehumanize Black people. Today, police brutality serves a similar function. It's the modern-day equivalent of those lynch mobs, acting with impunity and using violence to enforce a racial hierarchy. In both cases, there's a disturbing pattern. Black people are killed, the system protects the perpetrators, and those in power demand that we remain silent. But the Black Lives Matter movement refuses to be silent, just as I did. They call out injustice for what it is, and they demand accountability. What moves me most about Black Lives Matter is how it brings a global and intersectional lens to the struggle. In my day, I focused on anti-lynching campaigns and civil rights, but the movement now ties police brutality to broader systems of oppression: economic inequality, housing discrimination, health disparities, and more. They understand, as I did, that these issues are all connected and that true liberation requires addressing the entire system, not just its individual pieces. Of course, just as I faced criticism and threats for my work, Black Lives Matter activists have faced fierce backlash. People label them troublemakers or radicals, just as I was called a dangerous agitator for speaking out against lynching. But I learned long ago that the people who benefit from oppression will always resist change. The fact that this movement angers so many in power is proof that they're striking at the heart of injustice. And let me say this: I am inspired by the young people leading this movement. In my time, I often lamented that too many were afraid to act, but the courage and determination of today's activists fill me with hope. They march in the streets, organize communities, and use every tool available: social media, art, protests, policy advocacy, to make their voices heard. They are relentless, and that gives me great joy. If I could offer them any advice, it would be to keep going, no matter how hard the road may seem. The fight for justice is long, and progress often feels painfully slow. But every step forward matters. Every life saved, every law changed, every heart opened, these are victories, even in the face of overwhelming odds. So to the Black Lives Matter movement, I say, you are carrying the torch of freedom that so many before you lit. You are the proof that our struggle was not in vain. And as long as you keep fighting, I have no doubt that justice will prevail. Keep speaking truth to power, keep demanding what is rightfully yours, and never let anyone tell you that your life or your work does not matter, because it does. It always has.
That concludes our conversation with Ida B. Wells. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my story and my thoughts. It's been an honor to reflect on the struggles, victories, and lessons of my life. I hope my words serve as a reminder that the fight for justice is never over, and that each of us has a role to play in making the world more just and equitable. To those listening, stay vigilant, stay courageous, and always stand on the side of truth. Together, we can build the future we deserve. Thank you again, and may we all continue the work.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to check out our other episodes and subscribe for more. We would appreciate it if you rated the podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcast and liked the video on YouTube. It really does help. Interview Historical Figures is produced by Flying Whale Productions.